Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janabalabha Giri Baradari Yasodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada Jaya, Prabhupada Jaya, Prabhupada. Jaya Om Vishupad Paramahamsa Parvatakacharya To Tadasata Shri Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Samveda Bhaktivinoda Ki Gaur Premanandi. All glories to Samala Devotee. All glories to Samala Devotee. All glories to Samala Devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gaur. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Gananjana Shalakhaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai. Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale. Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam. Vandehang Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatan Bitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhunam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitam Cha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavan Eshvari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Okay, so according to what Natavar told me this morning, we are on Canto 3, Chapter 12, Text 33. Is that correct? I think Kadamakanana Swami gave class on 32 yesterday. Saitam Grinata Putran Saitang Grinata Putran Puro Drishta Prajapatin Puro Drishta Prajapatin Prajapati Patistanvam Prajapati Patistanvam Tatyaja Vriditastada Tatyaja Vriditastada Tamdisho Jagruhur Ghoram Tamdisho Jagruhur Ghoram Niharam Yadvidustamaha Niharam Yadvidustamaha Saitam Grunata Putran Puro Drishta Prajapatin Prajapati Patistanvam Tatyaja Vriditastada Tamdisho Jagruhu Ghoram Niharam Yadvidustamaha Saitam Granata Putran Puro Drishtva Prajapatin Prajapati Patistanvam Tatyaja Vriditastada Tamdisho Jagruhu Ghoram Niharam Vadvidustamaha Sa itam granata putran puro drishva prajapatim prajapati patistanvam tat yaja vriditastada tang disho jagruhu ghorang niharam yad vidustamaha sa itam granata putran puro drishva prajapatim prajapati patistanvam tatyaja vriditastada tang disho jagruhur ghorang niharam yad vidustamaha. Ladies, sa itam granata putran puro drishtva prajapatim prajapati patistanvam tatyaja viditastada tang risho jagruhu ghorang niharam yad vidustamaha saha he Brahma itam thus granata speaking putran sons puraha before drushtva seeing prajapatin all the progenitors of the living entities prajapati patihi the father of them Brahma tanvam body tatyaja quit vridita ashamed tada at that time tam that body dishaha all directions jagruhu accepted ghoram blamable niharam fog yat which viduhu they know as tamaha darkness. So the translation of this verse reads, the father of the Prajapatis, Brahma, thus seeing all his Prajapati sons speaking in that way, became very much ashamed and at once gave up that body he had accepted. Later, that body appeared in all directions as the dangerous fog in darkness. So I say, and you all please repeat, the father of all Prajapatis, Brahma, thus seeing all of his Prajapati sons speaking in that way, became very much ashamed and at once gave up the body he had accepted. Later, that body appeared in all directions as the dangerous fog in darkness. So here's Prabhupada's short purport. The best way to compensate for one's sinful acts is to give up one's body at once. And Brahma, the leader of the living entities, showed this by his personal example. Brahma had a fabulous duration of life, but he was obliged to give up his body due to his grievous sin, even though he had merely contemplated it in his mind without actually having done it. This is a lesson for the living entities, showing how sinful an act it is to indulge in unrestricted sex life. Even to think of abominable sex life is sinful. And to compensate for such acts, one has to give up his body. In other words, one's duration of life, blessings, opulence, etc., are decreased by sinful acts. And the most dangerous type of sinful act is unrestricted sex. Ignorance is the cause of sinful life, or sinful life is the cause of gross ignorance. The feature of ignorance is darkness or fog. Darkness or fog still covers the whole universe. And the sun is the only counteracting principle. One who takes shelter of the Lord, the perpetual light, has no fear of being annihilated in the darkness of fog or ignorance. Saitam gurnata putran puro rushva prajapatin prajapatis patis tanvam tatyaja vriditastada tam disho jagruhur ghoram niharam yadvidus tamaha. The father of all Prajapatis, Brahma, thus seeing all his Prajapati sons speaking in that way, became very much ashamed and at once gave up the body he had accepted. Later, that body appeared in all directions as the dangerous fog in darkness. So these are events at the very beginning of the universe. And as we've been talking about in this chapter 12 of the third canto, it started off with the first 27 verses being about the creation of 10 sages and 4 Kumaras and Shiva. Then this is a section which is 28 to 48, where we hear about Lord Brahma's undesired or undesirable attitude toward his daughter Vak. And then we hear later in the same chapter about the creation of the Varnashram system and the creation of the Vedas and a few other things. And then from 49 through 56 or whatever is the last verse in this chapter, we have the creation of Swayambhuvaman and Satarup. So this section is showing how difficult it is to live in this world and not make mistakes. The flow of the material world always sets us up to make a mistake. It's quite plain that it's easy to somehow do the wrong thing. And the reason it's easy that we do the wrong thing is we are spring-loaded with bad habits. And I thought Kadamba Kanana Swami did a good job yesterday when he was talking about this, the same concept, that we are set up, we are primed, we are habituated to doing the wrong thing. So doing the wrong thing is kind of second nature for us. It's not something that's mysterious or, somehow or other out of the ordinary. It's quite in the ordinary. Now, especially here, we're talking about the idea of sex life. As we hear, Lord Brahma did not actually engage in any sex life, but rather he simply contemplated the idea. Now, for those in a very high position, like Brahma, and those not Kali Yuga bunnies like us, even contemplating sinful acts is immediately sinful. But we have this dispensation, Kali Yuga, that we can think about sin, but it's not counted as sin until we actually do it. So, however, we should always be aware of the hidden fine print there, that if you continue to think about doing a sinful thing, you will certainly do it. So, and this gets us back to the overarching concept that one must control the mind. So either from the moment you wake up to the moment you conk out, it's duking it out with the mind, as Bhaktisiddhanta said. We beat the mind 100 times with a broomstick, and at night we beat the mind 1,000 times with a shoe. It's just all day long, it's duking it out with the mind. The mind brings us all kinds of fresh garbage, and we are prompted to think, do, say the wrong thing in some kind of way. But what's interesting is that if you do fight the battle in the mind, you won't have to fight the battle out here in the external world. Because actually, the mind is kind of like the rudder of the boat. In chapter 6 of Sri Bhagavad Gita, we have this whole explanation of the mind, starting with 6.5, where we hear that the mind has to be it can be the friend or the enemy. A person should strive to make the mind the friend. Because if we don't make the mind our friend, it will certainly be our enemy. So the mind is kind of a loose cannon bumping around, shooting off fireworks and other things. And it's been doing that since time immemorial, because we didn't know no better. We didn't try to do anything different. We just let the mind do its thing, Like I'm always, I think the best analogy for the mind is when you see people walking their dogs. They have these long tethers, and it's like the dog is going everywhere. He's pooping over there, he's peeing over there, he's sniffing that, he's barking at another dog, he's getting tangled up in somebody's legs. And so the mind is like that, and people try to drag the dog back, but the dog is, sometimes the dog is using his full energy just to go the different way than the person with the dog wants him to go. But of course, the human is much stronger than the dog, at least if it's a micro dog like we have here in New York City. In the rest of the world, people have real dogs. But in New York City, we have these micro dogs, yip, 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 these kind of little teensy weensy dogs, and people are moving them around. And of course, what's interesting is the whole ceremony that takes place when the dog does his business on the street, and then the person with the dog has to get out the venerable plastic, Ziploc bag and turn it inside out and grab the poo and then zip it back up and then they're off, So this is kind of you wonder who's the master, the person or the dog. The dog's just oogling everything, and the person's having to do all the work. So we have somehow or other to control the mind, which is like this dog running everywhere and doing all kinds of humiliating and dangerous and obnoxious things, because it's a dog, doesn't know what to do or what not to do. So controlling the mind means that we have to beat up on the mind, or else the mind will certainly beat up on us. There's only two possibilities, and you can beat up on the mind or it can beat up on you. You can take your choice, whichever you like. And actually, if you struggle with the mind, you will find over time you do get some measure of control over it. You know, it's like this stream of garbage, and you just let some of that garbage just flow on by. You don't have to figure out where it came from. You don't have to figure out why it's ridiculous. You just let it flow, you know. And if you can get in that kind of zone where you're just letting this garbage flow by, you're in a much better state of mind. Of course, chanting the holy name helps put us in that condition as well. The mind is so habituated to wrong thinking, like Kadamba Swami was saying. You know, we judge others, we find ourselves wanting to feel superior, we find some fault, we find something to be irked about. It's too hot, it's too cold, it's too late, we're too hungry, it's gone on too long, you know, whatever it is. There's always something going wrong. What's interesting, though, is the perversity of the mind. You can experience 5 or 6 or 10 good things, and one thing that kind of irks you, what will you remember? Later on, you'll remember only the thing that set you off. You know, you can have you know, like you can be on Sankirtan and talk to 20 people and have good rapport with them, but one person, you know, says something nasty. That's the thing you're going to remember. Or you can have a feast put out in front of you and everything is great, but one prep is a little burned or something like that. What are you going to remember? There's something really perverse about the mind, the way this kind of thing works. And people don't realize it. The mind is, you know, hijacking them. So in the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, we hear there's a chariot of the body. There's 5 horses. The 5 horses are what? 5 senses. Then we have the reins, and they are what? The mind. Then we have the driver of the chariot, and he is what? The intelligence, right? And finally, we have the person sitting in the chariot, you know, like the guy in the back seat of the cab, you know, staring at the guy's, you know, ID there on the back of the cab seat. You know, what is that person? The soul, right? Right. And of course, the whole thing, the chariot, is the body. So it's supposed to be the mind is pulling, I mean, the driver is pulling on the reins. The reins are the horses, and he's directing the horses. And so by using the mind properly, we direct the horses towards what we know they should actually be going to. Which means we have studied scripture, we've been involved in Krishna consciousness, and now we're learning this is the proper use of the mind, this is the proper use of the body, this is the right way to eat, this is the right kind of way to think, this is how I try to deal with other people. And by doing this enough times, we are redirecting the senses from all the wrong patterns, the dog-like mind, we are redirecting it from that to what it should be doing. So Brahma made a wrong step. And as a result, he gave up his body, which in this case was his mind. You know, Brahma, there's not much distinction between his body and his mind. He has a body of intelligence. So he doesn't have a gross body like we do. His body is much more superior. And not only that, but his body is connected to the entire universe, which is weird. You know, our body isn't connected to the entire universe, but his is. And simply by giving up his body, it turns into something. In this case, it turns into fog. So, by the way, I thought I'd just mention in passing, I don't want to belabor this one, but If someone falls down from sex life, they shouldn't give up their body. There was a devotee who did this, and it's a famous story because he thought that was what he should do. And later on, Prabhupada made a statement about it, that if one falls down to sex life, they shouldn't commit suicide. Although technically, according to Vedic literatures, that is an option, but one should not do that because, in Kali Yuga, it's a battle, and you'll have to fight that battle somewhere else, in another body. You're not going to get anywhere ahead. You might as well fight it in this body rather than getting another body. So at any rate, we have that statement by Prabhupada that we should not do that. Now, there's always the allure of sex attraction. It's no doubt the center of most people's thinking, especially our modern culture. If we want to know what people worship today, it's sex. There's no doubt about it. Every movie is about it. All songs are about it. People talk about it, think about it, dream about it, plan about it, come up with all kinds of ways and processes and techniques and strategies to arrange for it. And these days it's kind of ho-hum and, we try to get about our business, and people hook up, as they call it in our modern parlance. And, but this ignores the obvious thing that sex is an entangling thing. It's a karmic thing. You can't do it and then just pretend it didn't happen. It doesn't work like that. And those who are intelligent will try to work with their minds, and they will try to keep themselves in a situation where there's not much opportunity. Otherwise, if the opportunity is really easy, then there's a chance to stumble and fall. And then the repercussions for that are usually icky. It's not so easy to undo. And of course, now, there's been this leak that the SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States, is thinking about overturning Roe v. Wade, which is 1972 legal precedent that abortions can be had by simply the lady wanting to have the abortion. That's all. It's been decriminalized, but the Supreme Court of the United States is talking about making it illegal again. So there's a philosophy, and you'll hear this philosophy, that the unborn fetus is not a human. It's just a growth. Yeah. Okay. But it's a growth that'll turn into a human. Just a matter of time. So when does it stop being a growth and where does it start being a human? There's no reasonable thing. Of course, because of our culture is such a sex-oriented, sex-saturated culture, people are their own worst enemies. They're setting themselves up being agitated for sex, and naturally sex will happen. And then when it does, there's all kinds of ramifications, babies and venereal disease, emotional disturbances. Also these days, sex is a vehicle for abuse. Unfortunately, if people become connected sexually and they're not prepared for it and they're not thinking about it in a spiritual way, it will become a vector, a method for one person to abuse another. It's always kind of the way it works. That's why there's such a thing as marriage. That's why there is such a thing as recognizing that one has to be careful about engaging in relationships. You can't just throw them away like an empty Cracker Jacks box or something like that you've finished eating and now it's tossed in the garbage. Doesn't work like that. So what do the Vedas say about sex? Well, there's a number of things about it. Certainly, the Srimad Bhagavatam does not glorify the sexual act and the whole ethos that goes with it the way that our modern culture does. We hear Yan Maitunadi Grihamedi Sukham Hituchcham Kandu Yanena Karayor Eva Dukkha Dukkha Tripyanti Neha Bahuduka Bhaja Kanduti Van Manisi Jam Vishaheta Dira, which is sex life is described as two hands rubbing together to relieve an itch. I mean, you don't get, that's certainly not very glamorous, right? Sex life is described as two hands rubbing together to relieve an itch. And then it says, Grihamedis, or those so-called householders, take this itching as the highest form of happiness. The fools or the kripanas, who are the opposite of Brahmins, never get enough of this itching. But those who are dhira or sober, they tolerate this itching and thus are not subjected to the fools, to the miseries of fools and rascals. So this is kind of what that verse is. That's in Prahlad Maharaj, I think 7, or at least in the 7th canto, 549 or something like 7. I forget what the verse number is. So that's one thing we hear about sex life, which is not very glamorous, that sex life is compared to two hands rubbing together to relieve an itch. Those who are grihamedis, or so-called householders, think this rubbing together to relieve an itch to be the greatest form of happiness, when actually it's a source of misery or suffering. Those who are kripanas, or the opposite of brahmanas, never feel satisfied by repeatedly engaging in sex life. However, those who are dhira or sober tolerate this itching and therefore are not subjected to the sufferings of fools and rascals. Another verse, which is in 5th canto, Rishabdev, Pumsam striyami tuni bhavam etam tayor iba hridaya, what is it? Pumsam striyami tuni bhavam etam, what's the first word? Tayor mito hridaya graham ahu ato griha kshetra sutapta vitar janasya moho yamaham mameti. So, Pumsam striyama tuni bhavam etam tayor mito hridayam griham tayor mito, what is it after that? Tayor mito hridaya grantam ahu ato griha kshetra yuta ato griha kshetra sutata vitar janasya moho yamaham mameti. So that verse says that the attraction between male and female is the binding force of the material world, based on this misconception which ties together the heart of the male and female. One becomes attracted to body, home, property, children, relatives, and wealth. And this way one increases one's life's illusions and always thinks in terms of I and mine. So this is central to how people use up their time in the wrong way. Of course, we have to understand that most people will become householders. Now, they should not become grihamedis, they should become grihastas. So a Grihamedi means one who's like a bull that goes around a pole, just goes around in a circle. Whereas a Grihasta is a couple who live together, understanding that they're actually trying to help each other to advance in spiritual life, which is a different thing, although it's a difficult process. So marriage is not forbidden. As a matter of fact, it's mostly encouraged. However, one must not get lost in the process of bringing up a family. One cannot forget that spiritual life is still there, and we need to do that alongside of babies and school and buses and doing the car and paying off the mortgage and the whole enchilada, as they call it. So it's like that. So we have to do the whole thing. We also, when we see our minds going wrong, we have to just bring it back. We don't have to worry that the mind came up with some junk. It's been habituated to do that since time immemorial. But we do have to bring it back. And we're consistent in doing that. We're consistent in trying to do that. Basically, everything will work itself out. Doesn't matter. It's just like today, the weather is raining. Some days the weather is not raining. Some days it's nice out there. So some days the mind is kind of, big sun is rising, big smiles, everybody's saying, how do you do? And, other days, thunderbolts coming down, hurricanes, things whipping around, and we're barely holding on for dear life. Sometimes it's like that. And that's just the way life is, that just like we have weather outside, we have an internal weather. Sometimes our mind is like crazy, like a hurricane. Other times it's kind of sort of okay that day. It's not too turbulent. Of course, you can never trust it. It's always going to find some garbage, but some days it's really like, a real scene. So just endure the mind and try to push it in direction it needs to go. Chant the holy name, try to engage yourself in service, and usually you'll find that things will work out. The mind will eventually become a little bit more under your control. The thing that most people don't know is that their mind is controlling them completely. They don't have any idea how much crazy junk the mind comes up with, like second after second. If you wrote it down, you'd really be embarrassed. If you wrote it down, it would just shock you at how insane it is. What we hear 1 minute after another coming between these ears. Hey, do this. What about that? Well, did you think about this? Hey, check that out. It's always coming up with this stuff. And after a while, we go, oh, all right, yeah, oh, okay, yeah. We're just kind of brushing by, and it's flowing past us. And if we're engaged in service, we don't even notice it because we're focused on something. We're selling a book, we're chanting something, we're reading something, we're writing something, we're building something, we're fixing something, cleaning something, serving the deities. So in this way, because we're using our senses, the mind's automatically involved. When you clean something, you have to know what you're doing. You have to figure out, is it really clean? Do I have the right materials? Am I doing something dangerous? All these kind of things. So in this way, luckily, by engaging our senses, our mind usually gets dragged along a lot of the time. But still, we always have to be careful. So there's a whole bunch of more stuff I wanted to say, but there's no time. So I'm going to stop at this point and see if there's any questions or realizations. And I'm going to take a drink of water while Mike comes out.
Problem seems to be sex desire. So are we supposed to destroy it completely or engage that energy in a certain way? Or how do we...
Say that again.
How do we destroy sex desire?
Oh, well, you can't get rid of it just by making it, wishing it away. There's a couple of things, mostly kind of like I think Ram Roy said a few days ago, that the best defense is a good offense, you know. So if you're engaged in service, your mind generally doesn't focus on that. And of course, that's kind of a basic idea. But on a higher level, if we're actually trying to save the world, you know, if we're trying to help other people, we know that there will be times in all of our lives where, because you are not, you know, you don't have to be anybody really big and special, somebody will eventually ask you, what should I do about this? You know, they'll reveal their mind. And, you know, that's a person Krishna sent to you. And you remember them, you help them, you talk to them, and then later on you check back with them. How are they doing? You know, in this way, collect people. You know, like people collect these Pokemon things. So we're collecting people, you know, and if you start getting busy about other people's problems, you forget you have problems of your own, you know. It actually works like that, you know, that if you try to help other people's problems, you forget that you've got your own problems, you know. Somehow or other, Krishna just says, okay, we'll just don't think about that problem. I'll deal with it, you know. You deal with the other person's problems. And if you have this heart to try to really help other people, you will find yourself always kind of thinking about someone, doing something for someone, talking to someone, communicating with someone. And that, in a larger view, sort of lifts you up. So there is either thinking about your own individual biological family that you want to have, or there's making the whole world your family. And then, you know, don't put yourself in a position or a situation where the senses could suddenly strike. Don't do that. Avoid the near occasion of sin, as they say. And then try to chant and try to learn how to, you know, let the mind, just let the stuff that the mind comes up with from the past just flow on down line. You know, you don't have to figure out where it came from. You don't have to figure out what it means. You don't have to figure out any of that stuff. Just let it go. And some days it'll be like, you know, World War III, you know, things just coming moment after moment after moment. But you know that I think it was, I first read this in Victor Hugo's the Hunchback of Notre Dame, you know, extreme pain or extreme sorrow or extreme emotion is like extreme weather. It can't last very long. So, you know, if you've got an extreme thing happening to you, the weather's going to clear soon. If it's kind of a drizzle, that can go on for a while, you know, that can happen for a while. But usually an extreme downpour only happens for a short period of time. So those are a few things I might mention.
Hare
Okay.
Krishna Maharaj. So when is at what phase or what stage of our Krishna consciousness would the mind become subdued?
I think that's post-mortem. The mind is always going to try to do its little tricks. Of course, you get better at figuring it out, and it's not quite as wild as it was. Personally, I look back at what my mind was like before I came to Krishna consciousness, and it's like, I can't believe I lived through that era, you know. It was really crazy. I'm surprised I made it, you know, that it used to be, you know, that there were times where I would just kind of close my eyes and grit my teeth and try to get through the day somehow or other, you know, and my mind was screaming things, and I had weird dreams and all kinds of stuff, you know, and it's not like that anymore. Of course, still the mind is, it's not like it's under control or something, but it's better, much, much better. I don't have that. So it's kind of the modes of nature are part of the system, you know. So in the modes of passion and ignorance, then you've got the hurricane effect. I also sometimes describe the mind kind of like a merry-go-round. You know, as kids, you get on the merry-go-round, you push it, it goes round and round, you know. I remember when I was really little, in, I think, third or fourth grade or something like that, I was introduced to what they used to call flying on merry-go-rounds, where, you know, if you get you had kids in the center and they had the, you know, sort of good leverage there, and they could make it go really fast. And then you could hold on to the outside of it and just let your legs go, and you were actually vertical, you know, and because there was enough, you know, momentum going around the circle that you could fly like. Of course, if you let go, it was all over. You know, then you were kind of like flying onto the rocks in the thing, you know. So if you try to read a sign while you're on a merry-go-round, trying to read it, you can't read it, you know. But if the merry-go-round slows down, you get to the point where you can start to read the signs, you know. So it's kind of like that. As you engage in Krishna consciousness, the modes lighten up, you know, the modes of ignorance and passion start to subside a bit. And you find that your consciousness is a lot more stable than it was before. And you can read the signs now. You're not kind of whirling around so much. So, yeah, we have a question in the very back there.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you for the class. My question is, you were mentioning about tolerating the mind. What is your view on the argument of getting it over with once and not looking back? Like we have, as we further in the third canto, we have Kardama and Devahuti.
Right.
And Kardama got the darshan of Lord Vishnu, and he still was praying to Vishnu that I desire to have a wife, you know, and get married and have children and all that. So in that case, would it be wise to say, you know, like for some people just to get it over with and move on? Or
well,
is it
certainly for most people, it's the right choice, you know, that it's someone who really has, you know, a sense of commitment to preaching that might not need to go through the ashram situation. But if you have not that strong a commitment, then usually it helps to go through the marriage ashram, you know. It's definitely an entangling thing. There's no two ways about it, you know. Both the woman and the man, they're both entangled in so many things, you know. It's unbelievable, especially in the modern day. I mean, who was it that said the comment that in this age, it's easier to run a kingdom than have a family? There's just something very, there's so much diplomacy, plan making, troubleshooting, you know, this and that and the other. So it takes, like Kadamakanana Swami said, it's just more simple not to do that. But you can't do it artificially, you know. If Krishna gives you the mercy, then you can continue in having a very, very deep focus on preaching, and there's no necessity to get married. But for most people, it's probably the right choice.
Thank you very much.
Oh, we have a question over here.
Hey, Krishna Maharaj. I was wondering, in Srila Prabhupada's time, there was lots of, well, like his early disciples, I guess you could say, they got married, and then they were like there was that mood of preaching. So marriage with preaching. And I was wondering, like, if you could comment on that, if that's a possibility, or if that would also be entangled. Like, do you know what I mean? Like that, is there options for, because sometimes it's depending on which body you're in, sometimes it's a practicality. It's a practicality thing as well, like that if you don't really fit into an ashram, but you are a preacher, then sometimes, I don't know if you know what I'm saying, but I'm just wondering, is that dead, that whole idea of that you could be a grihasta and a preacher as well?
Yeah. In fact, we have a lot of couples, you know, that are, Prabhupada actually said that at the very beginning of the movement, that the Grihasta did more to spread the Krishna conscious movement than the sannyasis did, you know, that, if the marriage works like that, both the husband and the wife are really dedicated to preaching, they're still going to have a lot of stuff to do with, you know, bringing up a family, children, etc. But if they're both interested in preaching, then, you know, that's usually a very powerful thing, because then, the wife can preach to the ladies and the man can preach to the man, and it works out much better that way, you know. So that's certainly a desirable thing. But we all know that you got to throw the dice, you know. That's how it is, you know. And the interesting thing is that before you become connected in matrimony to somebody, you never know what the other side of them looks like, you know. And then shortly, a few months after you're married, you know only too well what the other side of them looks like, you know. And that's where, you know, you have to learn to work it out some kind of way, because both the man and the woman are going to experience the same thing. You know, they're going to see that side that they didn't see before, but now is all too obvious, you know. And then we have to work through it and keep a priority on the preaching, and somehow or another deal with all the 1,001 details that it takes to keep a family together. But there's many examples in ISKCON of couples that have done amazing things. You know, I can think of, Kalakanta in Florida, and there's a couple that travel around distributing books, older couple, and who? Yeah, I think so. And name slips my mind for some reason. I get these senior moments where I'm Apurva and his wife, and there's a lot of examples of that. All right, so we're up at the top of the hour. So all glories to Srimad Bhagavatam, all glories to the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord, all glories to Shri Shri Radha Govinda Dev. Hare Krishna.